would hit me, and I got suspended. But thankfully, my mom, and you'll hear me in the panel there. My mom raised holy hell and got it whittled down to 1 day. And because she was happy that I stood up for myself, we hit McDonald's on the way home.
Yeah.
That is how cool my mom is.
True. But the thing is, too, at the same time, when you know that your child is actually not in the wrong, I mean, there should be some encouragement for doing something good. Like they mentioned in the panel, and of course you'll hear us too, but someone who jumps in to stop a fight, to pull someone else off who's like punching someone. Instead of it just being the two people getting suspended for having a fight, now all three is being suspended, even though the one was just trying to stop the fight.
And what does that teach kids? If you try to jump in to help, you'll just get in trouble too. And that basically encourages kids to just look the other way. Like I mentioned, bystander syndrome.
Exactly.
Bystander syndrome. Basically, I know we're invoking Godwin's law here with this, but basically the way that Nazi Germany operated, where all these supposedly good people let this regime go through, is because of bystander syndrome. Not one person would dare speak up against it for fear of being silenced or worse.
Yeah.
Or the murder of Kitty Genovese. Genovese, you've heard of that one, right?
I have.
Yeah. Yeah. People heard her screaming for help, and did nothing. And did absolutely nothing. There is a line in a movie called The Meteor Man, an underrated Robert Townsend one, where he gets superpowers from a meteor, and the neighborhood basically encourages him to help them fight back against a gang that's taken over. Well, the gang attempts to drive by on the community center and winds up ramping up the assault. And of course, the neighborhood blames him. But the neighbors wind up blaming him for the neighborhood becoming a war zone, despite the fact that it was their bright idea, to use him as a weapon without seeing these consequences. And they decide to get him out of the neighborhood in hopes of making the deal with the gang, and he winds up unloading on them. And best of all, he does it without raising his voice. He's just incredibly hurt by this. He just says, "You don't have to vote. I'll leave. I'm sorry about what happened in the neighborhood tonight, but I feel even sorrier watching what's going on in this room. How can we stop the crime and the gangs if we act like we don't see them? Everybody complains about the police. They aren't perfect. But how can you complain when you do nothing? You don't have to vote." And that's bystander syndrome in a nutshell there. That was beautifully done.
Exactly.
Beautifully done. Basically, how can you complain about how kids act these days, about the bullying and the violence, when you stand there and do nothing?
Exactly. It's very true.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, I definitely loved the panel. Actually, to be honest, some of the stories that were shared, not just by the panelists, but actually even by some of the people there too, it kind of got a little heart-wrenching a little bit, you know. It kind of brought some tears to my eye a little bit. And,
weeping in the whole thing there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because for any person who's ever had to deal with bullying in any form, whatever format it takes, it reaches a certain point in your mind where it's like, you know, you sympathize with it. You empathize with that whole thing. So, you know, it's heart-wrenching to know that people obviously are still dealing with it, and it's going to be a problem that's going to be existing for a while. But these groups that exist,
we may not have a perfect utopia, but you know, we can.
But as long as we have these groups too that actually help speak out,
we can actually make the world a better place. As they say in Death to Smoochie, Death to Smoochie. You can't change the world, but you can make a dent.
Exactly. So,
I know, it's probably the last place you'd expect a motivational quote to come from.
Oh my god, yeah. I mean, considering what the whole thing with that movie.
Yeah,
it's a little bit.
I mean, you know, we have my stepdad's not mean, he's just adjusting, but still, it's that nice little bit of wisdom, and I think it just helps because the character is basically so earnest and sweet and kind, and he is basically like Mr. Rogers, where it's not an act, it's completely genuine.
Exactly.
Genuine. He strongly believes that you can't change the world, but you can make a dent.
Indeed. So is there anything else?
And I was just saying, if you make enough dents,
then you have a flat Earth.
oh God, don't add fuel to that fire, for God's sake.
Okay.
But,
so anyway,
yeah.
Did we want to talk any more about this anti-bullying panel that we went to, or should we move on to the next?
Well, I don't know. How do you feel about it? Do you think we've covered it rather well?
I think we've definitely covered it fairly well.
Yeah, we left our voicemail number with Mr. Dean, and hopefully he'll get back to us.
Indeed, exactly.
Dean. So.
I'm a little boy with glasses, the one they call a geek. A little girl who never smiles, 'cause I got braces on my teeth. And I know how it feels to cry myself to sleep. I'm that kid who every playground is always chosen last. A single teenage mother trying to overcome my past. You don't have to be my friend, but is it too much to ask? Don't laugh at me, don't call me names, don't get your pleasure from my pain. In God's eyes we're all the same. Someday we'll all have perfect wings. Don't laugh at me. I'm the beggar on the corner. You pass me on the street, and I wouldn't be out here begging if I had enough to eat. And don't think I don't notice that our eyes never meet. But don't laugh at me, don't call me names, don't get your pleasure from my pain. In God's eyes we're all the same. Someday we'll all have perfect wings. Don't laugh at me. I'm fat, I'm thin, I'm short, I'm tall, I'm deaf, I'm blind. They aren't we all? Don't laugh at me, don't call me names, don't get your pleasure from my pain. In God's eyes we're all the same. Someday we'll all have perfect wings. Don't laugh at me. Don't laugh at me.
For how many of you is that the first time you heard that song? First time? Pretty powerful, isn't it? And so what I'd like to kick off the program with is that's what GAB is about. We're an organization that wants to make an inroad into schools and churches and families' lives where people who are subjected to that kind of pain, we can start not only helping them, but prevent that sort of thing. Now, just from a therapist standpoint, people who go through this horrible phase of bullying and the many forms it can take, it is done in many ways. What I see as a clinician is, I'll meet with people then who have started to think and to believe thoughts like this. Something is wrong with me. I'm not likable. I don't fit in. I have nothing to offer. I can't trust people. I don't feel safe in certain situations. If I'm heavy, people won't like me. If I'm too skinny, people won't like me. if I'm a certain race or certain nationality, people might not like me. And so what this does is, what that kind of thinking, when we have negative thinking, it causes us to be anxious. And when we're thinking negatively and hurting by our thoughts, we also become very unhappy. And a lot of times unhappiness and sadness, which are normal, they're crummy, but they're normal, leads to depression. And so then people start struggling with, what do I do when I'm depressed? So you folks are familiar with and you understand the power of that song. And so what we'd like to do today is give you thoughts on some of the things that people have gone through and what maybe are some good ideas that you can take home to prevent this and to help people who are going through it. So we'll see what the panel does with that. Now, questions will be part of it at some point, but James will lead that.
Thank you, Dr. Nesky. I'd like to introduce Mr. Scott Wales, who is a judge in the Milwaukee area. And I've asked him, look, these are tough things to do. I've asked him to tell a story. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the legalities that are associated with bullying and what's happening in our communities right now. So, Scott, you're up.
Thank you. I'm up, but I'll sit, if that's okay. First off, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here, not because I like saying those words, but because it's true. James highlighted that I'm a judge. I'm actually a municipal judge in the village of Fox Point, and that's where I live. But I'm also a defense attorney, and I bring this up because I have the pleasure and the privilege to work with people who get accused of things. Sometimes they're accused of things that they didn't do. And it's how they deal with that that shapes their lives and shapes their future. My story, in terms of why I do what I do, is when I was younger, and I still live with it today, but especially when I was a child, I was born with something called Mobius syndrome. It's not something you're probably familiar with, but Mobius syndrome is a neurological condition that causes, as you see with me, facial paralysis. It started literally when I was born. And I couldn't speak when I was younger. I needed a lot of intervention from speech pathologists to help me just learn how to talk and communicate. And I'll share with you a little secret. Growing up can be kind of hard. And in growing up, children, no matter if they're your age, younger, or even a little bit older, I think the phrase today might be, sometimes children don't have a filter. And what that translates to is that kids react. And they don't always think because their brains, their minds are racing. So when they see something that they're not familiar with or that they just look at and don't particularly like or think is appropriate, they respond. And that's called, in some ways, bullying. So when I grew up, without having the ability at a much better level, I'd like to think, to speak well for myself, I would be bullied, and it hurt. And I think what Dr. Nesky highlighted, for me at least, was how do you deal with that? And everybody's different. Everyone has their own circumstances, so I'm not here to be necessarily anyone's template. But what I can tell you is the best source of inspiration, in my opinion, to deal with things that affect you is in a phrase, believe in yourself. You have the most control over who you are and what you choose to do and how you choose to respond to literally everything. And so for me, even when my moments were low and I would be consoled by my parents or friends who I was close with, and trust me, there weren't many, the overriding theme or the overriding thought was, I had to believe in me. Unfortunately,